Chapter 9, week 3 of your text, the family, talks about adolescence, which you've already had an opportunity of hearing that lecture, hopefully, and if not, please do so, as well as read the material. And the second half of that text was midlife. And so at the beginning, before I started reading, I thought it was interesting that adolescence and midlife were written together in one chapter. But then after the authors unpacked that very first statement that I talked about in the lecture of the adolescence, it talks about how the greatest conflicts within the families are likely to occur when the children are in adolescence. The greatest conflicts of the family are likely to occur when the children are in their adolescence. And the correlation of that is because parents are entering, or they are already in midlife when their children are entering adolescence. And so if we look at that from a family systems perspective, what we see is that adolescents are going through a lot of different changes biologically, socially, even mentally as well, with their brain changing, their body changing, things of this, and they're asking questions such as, who am I? Where am I supposed to go? Who am I supposed to be? All these different questions. And then simultaneously, according to the text, the parents of these adolescents are going through midlife, are entering midlife, or they're already in midlife. And so during that midlife time, this population is evaluating the very questions that the adolescents are asking. Now that they've had an opportunity of walking through life in a significant portion of their life, they're evaluating, they're assessing the very question that these adolescents are asking. So who I thought I was, am I that person? What I've given my life to do, has it been beneficial? And so they're assessing these very questions. And so from a family systems perspective, if you have these adolescents that are going through all these transitions, and you have these midlife, their parents going through all these transitions, then you've got a lot of transition within the home, which could cause a lot of friction as a whole. And so I think that's the reason why the authors unpacked that statement the way they did, that friction takes place in the home, typically when children are in this adolescent phase, because simultaneously their parents are in midlife. And so what is it that you think of when you hear the word midlife? My first thought that I think of is midlife crisis. Why that is, I don't know. But again, I think it's just because typically we don't really think about midlife other than it's a phase where people are evaluating. And because of that, it can be very crisis oriented, that all these external pressures are pushing in on the individual. And if you watch the lecture of the diagram that I drew, then you can see that these external pressures, these external thoughts, all these different dynamics of trying to evaluate their life and what they've done with their life, what's inside them is getting smushed to the external. And so if I took a grape and I smushed it together, what's going to happen is what's ever inside of that grape is going to come out. And this is one of the reasons why I believe Paul said, why do I do the things I don't want to do, and the things I do want to do, I don't do? These very external things that press up against us, the soul, the things on the inside come out. And so during this time, this population is evaluating. And so the text talks about, and this lecture comes straight from the text, so if you already read it, then this should be a summarization. If not, then this should get and give you a snapshot of what it is that you're going to read. The authors talk about that adults in the labor force are especially vulnerable when they realize that the jobs that they're trained to do or have been doing for most of their adult lives are becoming obsolete. Why? Because of technology, computers, even robotics, right? And so now not only are they evaluating all these questions that their children in the adolescent years are asking, but they're also trying to determine what's going to happen with me and my family. What am I supposed to do now? So they could be even asking some of the various questions that adolescents are even asking themselves. So you can see a tremendous correlation in why the authors wrote adolescence and midlife in the same chapter. Midlife transition may also be a crisis for people who begin to realize that they may not reach the lofty goals that they set goals that represent their self-esteem. And so if you ask a lot of college students that are coming out of college, I'd be interested what their perspective would be. Would it be that they're ready to take on the world, that they have what it takes and all the different parameters? And what, if that is the case, then what happens between the time they graduate and to this time of midlife? Well, life has happened, and as a result, they have experienced a lot. And so now within midlife, this population is evaluating. And so they're processing, they're thinking, they're assessing their life that's been up until now, and so that they could potentially make some changes so that the rest of their life could be differently. It can be a very depressing time because of everything that they have chosen up until now hadn't really worked out from their perspective. And so they can become very victimized in this time as well, saying that, well, what's the point of moving forward when nothing really up to this time has really worked out for me? So we can see these. And so others who have worked long and hard hours at their jobs reach midlife only to realize that they've spent little time with their children, who are now nearly grown or are already grown and have little or no influence over their children. And so what has this population given up to get where they are? And now what they're coming to understand is the potential of their jobs becoming obsolete, or the anxiety of if that's going to happen to them, right? And so Daniel Livingston identifies 4 polarities of midlife transition. And so you're going to be able to go back through and read what it is that he talks about within these 4 polarities, but I just wanted to give them to you so you could highlight them and go back and read them. He talks about the youth/age polarity. He talks about the deconstruction versus creating polarity. He talks about the masculinity and the femininity polarity, and the attachment and the separateness polarity. And so go back in there in your text and read what's the expression of that, where Mr. Livingston talks about of these 4 different midlife transitions and what they mean to humanity. And so the authors communicate that men who have dealt with these polarities throughout their lives do not experience midlife transition as a crisis. Why is that? Because it doesn't hit all at one time. And so when we go through things in life, when it hits us all at one time, we can become very overwhelmed to the situation, and it can be very crisis oriented. But if we process these things over the duration of a longer span, then it doesn't feel like becoming so overwhelming to us. And so again, if these external pressures, these external tensions, thoughts, whatever it may be, are pressing into the soul, and what's in us is coming out, it's not happening all at one time. According to the author, what it's doing is it's a slow press so that men can process as it comes. And so a midlife transition for women is less pronounced than men. And so then the authors transition to talk about empowering children. And so what does that empowering look like for the dynamics of these midlifers going through what it is and processing and everything that the text communicates, simultaneously while they're adolescent, their children are going through the phases that they're going through. And one of the biggest issues that we see within parenting is that parents see their children grow developmentally. Right, they're getting bigger with age. They're taking on new developmental tasks, but the parent does not grow developmentally simultaneously. And so, if you see this, then you will have a parent that will have a hard time letting go. You see this enmeshment that the parents are seeing their children grow developmentally, but as a result, the parent still sees them as their baby. Right? I have a baby. I have a 2-year-old. He's our baby of the family, so he will always be the baby of our family. But do I see him as the baby? And if I see him as the baby, how am I going to interact with him as being the youngest one within our family? It could actually hinder him. And so if you look at the word and take it and kind of dissect it, it says empower. That power part is significant. And what I feel like is if we're not empowering, then we're dispowering. We're taking their power away from actually being engaged in society and really being all that God wants them to be. And for us as parents, is we can empower them to do so, or we can dispower them to actually do that. And how I view my children and see them, if I continue to see them as a little 2-year-old that they were back, when, then I can actually, and I engage them from that perspective, then I can cause a little friction. And so it is healthy when a parent grows developmentally simultaneously while their child does. The role of the parent changes as their child grows and become young adults. Again, if my little 2-year-old, if I continue to see him as a 2-year-old as he gets married, and yet I interact with him still from that perspective, perspective, then what's going to happen? It's going to cause friction between our relationship. And this is just not on the parent empowering it's not just on the parent, but it's also on the adolescent as well, the young adult, the child, because they have the opportunity to receive that and walk in that, right? And so if someone comes off the street and hands you a $100 bill, their job is to hand it to you. You still have a part. You have to take it and receive it, right? And so if the parent is empowering that child by giving them opportunities to really walk in that, but the child doesn't actually receive it, then there can cause friction because the child has a part to play in this as well. And so I don't want it to feel like it's just the parent's part. The parent has a significant part, but as you can see through that illustration, is the child has one as well. If we use the Nemo illustration from the video clip that we talked about within the discussion board too, there was 2 opportunities to answer. One was the Nemo. What you'll see if you finish that movie is that you'll see that Marlin, his dad, grew developmentally as a parent to do what? Empower Nemo at the very end of the movie. And we see that by his friend Dory getting caught by a fish net. And so Nemo swims up or wants to tell his dad, I've got to go in and I got to encourage all the other fish to swim down. And Marlin at the beginning was like, no, I can't lose you again. And Nemo was like, Dad, trust me. And so Marlin said, okay, go get him, son. And so Nemo did what he said he was going to do. And as a result of that, was able to save his friend. So, but if you go at the beginning of the movie, Marlin would not have done that. And we see that within the clip of just this interaction between Nemo being a part of where he was to go touch the boat and be with the rest of his classmates, right? So what changed through that process? What took place? How did that happen? Through a very hard and painful process of Marlin discovering himself through the journey of the movie of reunification with Nemo. Very fear and pain, but as a result of that, the connection changed. If you go back and look at the clip that was on Blackboard, you see this disconnection that takes place between Marlin and Nemo. But at the end, because of Marlin growing developmentally, what happens? There's a connection. There's a reunification that takes place. And because of that, there's a tremendous bond between Marlin and Nemo. So parents are scared to trust their children because they could get it wrong. Something could happen to them, and that is true, but they also could get it right. And so if we see it from that lens, how does God empower us, his child? And does he take away the opportunities because he's scared that we might get it wrong, not get it right? Or does he take away opportunities because in the past we have gotten it wrong? Or is there a redemptive plan by the times that we do get it wrong that he can really reveal revelation to us so that as a result, from this perspective, we can get it right, if you allow me to say it from that semantics? Is it a training process where we get the opportunity to grow and learn under him who trains us, which is God? And again, you're going to see me utilize the scripture to train up a child in the way they should go, so when they're old, they won't depart. Again, that's looking at whom? God, as training us, his children, just as we as parents should train up our children. And that's a very empowering process. And so again, this wraps up chapter 9 from your the family book with the lecture earlier talking about adolescence. And so hopefully this kind of gives you a perspective as you read your text, so you're able to connect the dots and be able to utilize the material that the authors communicate. So we'll see you next time.